Is the clock rolling, Captain?
It is.
We are back again. This is episode 16 of Third Floor Theatrics from the beautiful Studio 26. I'm Darren.
I'm Noah.
And what are we talking about today?
We're going to be talking about kind of how, in our opinion, the film industry has been going lately with reboots and remakes, stuff like that. You know, I feel like a lot of the new things coming out are kind of riding the success of old genres, you know?
Right.
Like the thing that comes to mind is the two most recent Ghostbuster movies. And that was just one of the more recent movies I watched. I didn't watch the first remake.
Well, you've got.
I heard that one was really bad.
Here you go. There's a little bit of a differential here. So the one that had the whole all-female cast was, I guess, sort of a remake. I've seen bits and pieces. The new one is just a sequel.
Yeah, but you know, it's something that comes out all of these years later.
Well, it's still a sequel. It ties in with 1 and 2.
So I guess we can tie in sequels to this as well, because a lot of times, like with that instance, it's something that was made so long ago, and they're like, okay, after all these years, we're gonna go and make a sequel or a prequel or whatever. And I feel like a lot of that is because they know it's a successful franchise.
There is a history, though, to this. And since we're talking about films, and I'm a film buff and nut and fanatic and everything else, they wanted to make a third Ghostbusters movie years ago. Like, within a few years of the second one coming out in 89. They wanted to make one in the early 90s. Mm-hmm. Bill Murray refused to do it. He wouldn't do it. And they're like, well, we got to get Bill back because he's one of the main guys. And they couldn't get it. I think everybody else was kind of on board. They said, well, we got to get a story. I mean, there was like 5 years between 1 and 2. So they were going to do one years and years and years ago. They couldn't get Bill to do it. And then things just happened, and they were supposed to shoot it, and then it got delayed, supposed to shoot and got delayed. So it was not that they just waited 30 years. They were going to do this years ago, and then they couldn't. And then Harold Ramis passed away. He's the one that in the new one is the ghost.
Yeah.
And when he passed away, they're like, well, we can't do it at all now because without him, that we can't do it. And finally, they came up with this story where they could incorporate his actual death, and because the actor died, and they said, well, we can incorporate the character's death. But no, that was something that was going to happen years. They could have been on Ghostbusters 5 or 6 at this point, but 3 never happened. The remake doesn't really count because with the all-female cast, because it doesn't tie into any of the other movies.
Yeah, but it's still based under the same franchise, you know. Like, that's what I'm getting at.
Yeah, it's still a Ghostbusters
movie.
But people don't acknowledge it because it really has nothing to do.
And I think that's what a lot of places are doing now. Like I love Marvel, I love Star Wars and stuff, but they rebooted the Star Wars movie. Well, not reboot. I don't know the correct term for it, but they made all these new Star Wars movies.
They continued the story.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what you got to differentiate.
Well, I'm not good at that.
Okay, so what a reboot is, let's give you 101 here. A reboot or remake is basically,
I get what a remake is.
Just taking a story and remaking it.
Yeah.
And that's sort of a reboot too. A sequel is just continuing. It's like another chapter.
Yeah.
Star Wars was just continuing the story of the Skywalkers and Luke and the Jedi and all that. The problem is there's so many remakes that are done. And one time I saw an interview with John Carpenter, who's a legendary horror director, did Christine, did the original Halloween, The Thing, Big Trouble in Little China. I mean, he's got a resume. It's just insane. Legend. And somebody said, why are they making so many remakes? Why are they remaking so many old horror movies? And he goes, because it's familiar. People know, they know that story. They go, oh yeah, I remember the original. So let's go see the remake. And that's why they do them. Then they make money, and they don't. You're not starting from scratch. Everybody goes, oh yeah, I remember. Let's give an example. Amityville Horror. Okay, they made one in the 70s. Well, they did a remake in 2005 with Ryan Reynolds. Same story. It's all about the same family. It's just a remake. And it's like, well, and then there was about 19 million spinoffs that have nothing to do with anything. But they remade that one movie. Everybody remembered. I remember the original from the 70s. I remember the story about the family in the house. And it's familiar. That's why the remakes are so... And you're not reinventing the wheel. You're just copying it, basically.
Yeah, you don't have to base...
You have to explain too much.
Yeah, you don't have to base everything on this original idea where you go in and be like, I don't know if this is going to work. This is the idea. Because when you do that, you don't know how people are going to perceive it. Like, you can think you're making a great movie, but a lot of people might not like it.
Yeah.
So I think they're playing like a safe route where they're like, okay, well, we know people like Ghostbusters.
Right.
We know people like Star Wars. Let's do that.
Right.
Because like you said, that it doesn't need a lot of explanation. Like, nobody walked into the first Star Wars movie, not the first one made by Disney, like the one in recent years. Mm-hmm. No one walked into that being like, well, I don't know what Star Wars is. Let's just go check this out.
Right. But that's not a reboot or remake. That's
no,
just a continuation.
It's continuation. Yes. But the thing is, it's all these years later.
Right.
That's what I feel like is happening a lot now, is these things from so many years ago, they're all of a sudden getting continued.
Right. And, for me, it's like I grew up with Star Wars. So when Return of the Jedi came out in 1983, I was like 11. And for years, we had no Star Wars. We had nothing for years. So when they started making the series again and continued the series, we were all about it because like, oh man, I mean, it was like 1983, and then it jumped to like, they did the remake, the part, because they're out of order, because you had 4, 5, and 6 is what came out.
Yeah.
So they did the prequels, which is 1, 2, and 3. So when 1 came out, in 1999, it had been years. You go jump from 83 to 99. We were all about it because like, oh, it's back. Star Wars is back. We were totally excited. And, now they're doing the spinoff TV series and animation. And
yeah, there's like just a ton of Star Wars content that you can consume right now.
I think the thing about remakes per se is it is familiar, and people think that they can do it better, and technologically a lot of times they can. Sometimes if they go, well, they couldn't really do those kind of special effects back in the day, we're going to remake this with modern effects. But a lot of times it loses its charm. Like it's more realistic, but it doesn't have the charm of the original. Mm-hmm. Or maybe the actors aren't quite as, it's like, man, I really like the other guy that played that character. The new guy, they got to play the same character. I don't like that guy, and so Ian, my movie partner, Ian Mayer, he hates a lot of remakes. Like, he just is like, just leave it alone. They did the original. It was great. It's a classic. Don't remake it. There's certain movies I don't know that I don't think they'll ever remake Jaws. Jaws is one of those movies that's just like, you can't improve that movie. I don't think they'll ever remake, they won't remake Star Wars. They will continue the series.
Yeah.
And have spin-offs and other characters, but they won't remake the basic story that I grew up with, the old movies. There's certain movies they won't, like, they're not going to remake The Godfather. Mm-hmm. There's certain movies they won't remake because they're just too legendary.
Yeah. I feel like remakes aren't nearly as popular as continuations. Now that, like, we're actually talking about it, like, I know I said reboots and remakes, but that was just kind of on a whim. Like, that's what we decided to call it.
Right.
But, I think continuations are by far a lot more popular.
Right.
Like, another thing that comes to mind, and movies that I enjoy, but they are continuations, is going from Jurassic Park to Jurassic World.
Yeah.
Like the same concept and everything, but it is technically continuation of it.
Yeah, it's a series.
Yeah. And it's like, once again, they kind of revamped and continued this movie saga all these years later. And, you know, I really like the Jurassic World movies, but, you know, it still is a continuation that came.
It's all one big story. I mean, it ties in with the first three, the two new ones, and then the third new one. It's all the same story. It's about it started out about the islands and about the dinosaurs on the two different islands, and yeah, it's the same story. You know, it's like chapters in a book. You know, if you look at each movie as a chapter, that's like it's one big story, but it's split off into chapters.
Yeah, the author just decided to write chapter 3 20 years later.
Well,
I think
but you got to understand with movies though, as opposed to a guy writing a book, an author can write a book yearly.
mm-hmm.
You know, like if the guy that writes Game of Thrones, he can crank out. Well, I think he's fairly slow, but I think that's on purpose. But some of these writers crank out a novel every year, and so every year you got a new chapter. Films, it's all about money, actors. Well, this guy's got a movie coming up. He's under contract for next year, so now we've got to wait till the following year to film it, and then you got 6 months of post production. So now it's going to be 2 years, and so I mean, that's what happens,
Yeah, and I understand that. I just think a lot of it is people are, I don't want to say afraid, but I would say apprehensive of coming up with a lot of original ideas now.
Well,
in the movie industry.
they say this, and it's true, I think, that there are no new ideas. Everything's been done. And I think that's true to a point with movies and music and TV, and it's like we've seen so much that, like, somebody comes up with some great story and goes, "Oh man, this is great, and this is going to be a good movie." And then somebody goes, "Hey man, they did a movie 10 years ago that was like, I didn't even know about that movie," but it's like so he didn't even reference it. He just thought he was coming up with something original, and actually somebody did almost the same thing 10 years ago, 20 years ago. There's been so much content out that it's hard to be original.
Yeah.
And that's another reason that they make so many reboots, remakes, continuations, because it's the familiar and it's the money thing, And,
I know we're talking about it, but I really don't mind the continuations. But I think, at least for me, like, I do enjoy the new Jurassic World movies, and I enjoyed the Jurassic Park movies. I remember watching those when I was younger, because it was something like my dad showed me, like, hey, look at this, like this came out, like this was a cool movie, and I was like, yeah, it was cool. But I think they play a risk too of coming out with a continuation and people just taking it so negatively and being like, this, like,
it's not as good as the first one.
No, I'm trying to, it like defames the first one. Like it puts that sour taste in their mouth.
The thing about it is, if you've got a series of movies that continues for years and years and years and years, and it's the same story, it's in sagas, it's in just different chapters, you might have a weak chapter. Like if you look at the Jurassic Parks, a lot of people think that the second one was the weak chapter. Then there's people that think the third one was the weak chapter. The last two have been really good. Some people go, I like them two new ones. So it's all about, but the new one that's coming out this year has the original cast from the first, it has, so I can't remember their names, but it's got the guy that played the doctor. The guy and the girl that were in the very first one.
Yeah.
They're in it. Like the whole the original cast, with the exception of the older guy that played the founder of Jurassic Park, the old guy with the beard and the cane.
Yeah.
Of course, he's passed away. He's not in it, but the original cast have come back for this. Now, what I've heard is that this is going to wrap up like the current saga. So it's basically 6 films. You had the first 3, and then these 3 new ones, right?
Yeah.
This is going to wrap up, but then they're going to start another trilogy after.
Of course.
Well, yeah, and you also thing is that people go, man, what is it? Because my wife will go, what is that, Jurassic Park 10, 15, 20? You know, she's not a fan of Jurassic Park. I think most women are not a fan of dinosaurs. They're also not a fan of the Three Stooges. You'll learn that as you get older. They hate the Three Stooges. But I think what you have to understand is, and being a filmmaker, even though on a micro scale myself, with the Moonlight guys and what we do is, if something is successful, and you are running it is called show business. It's a business. If it's
And
something that's successful, you're gonna hey, well, let's do another one. Let's do another one.
And that's something we would do too. Like if say we did a podcast over, I don't know, fruit.
We're gonna do part 2 on fruit probably.
And it blows up way bigger than all of the other podcasts we've done. We're gonna do a part 2 to fruit,
or
and
on vegetables or something. Yeah,
I understand that, but I think it's something that I've noticed.
People hate
a lot lately.
A lot of people hate sequels. They're like, okay, they did the first one was great. Why do another one? Why are they doing another one? Well, there's two things about this. And like I said, one is business. It's making money. Mm-hmm. They're not going to, especially in Hollywood, they're not going to say no to money. And two, if it's a guy, like if the director or the writer, if his vision is 3 films, then that's what he wants to do. If he says, I want to tell this in 3 films, I want to tell this in 2 films, I want this is a multi-part saga, which is what George Lucas had planned for Star Wars all along, That's the thing about it is when Star Wars came out and then it stopped, George had talked about doing part 1, 2, and 3 for years, and he didn't do it. And people, it's like, man, I was going to do it, and then he finally did. Mm-hmm. And so he was technically done. And then he sold everything to Disney, and then Disney goes, oh, well, we can make some money on this Star Wars stuff.
Yeah.
And they knew they could, because Star Wars is it's huge. It's just a massive thing, and it always has been. So, well, I don't think initially it was. The first movie, I remember I just saw something about that recently. Like when the first movie came out in 1977, everybody knows, there's 9 billion Star Wars toys out there. They didn't know the first movie was going to do any money, so the toys didn't come out till after the movie. Like nowadays, the toys are in stores. There's something in stores like months before the movie ever comes out.
Yeah, for sure.
But no, sequels and series. A lot of people hate the sequels because they go, well, why are they doing another one? Like I said, it's a money thing, or it's a creative thing, or and then people hate reboots because they're like, leave it alone. The first one was great. You can't improve it. You can't make it any better. The one movie that was remade that I was really surprised was Psycho. Psycho was made in 1961, and it was Alfred Hitchcock, which was a legendary director, right? So Psycho was one of those movies that was like early horror, extremely well made. So in the early 90s, they decided we're going to make a shot-by-shot remake. So when I'm talking remake, they did it shot by shot. It wasn't just a remake. They hired Vince Vaughn to play Norman Bates, which was sort of miscast in my opinion. It was like, I don't know if he's the right guy to play Norman Bates. But they shot it shot by shot identical to the original. Only it was made in the 90s, and it was in color. The original was black and white. And it really didn't do that well because people go, all you did was copy the original.
Yeah.
And you couldn't improve the original. It was Alfred Hitchcock. You couldn't improve it. It was like one of the most legendary films ever made, Psycho. And it's like you can't. So there's times that you just go, you go, what studio guy approved that? What guy thought that was a good idea? And somebody probably thought they could make money.
I can kind of understand, especially, let's say, like, if that movie, like the one you said from, like, 1961.
Right.
If they didn't remake it all those years later, and, like, they remade it kind of, like, now. Because I feel like a lot of people, like, I've never heard of that movie, so
it's a hell of a movie. It really is.
If they did remake it now, and it's a great movie, like you said, I mean, it'd be nice to bring that to a newer audience. So, like, I can kind of understand it.
I understand the thought process, and it probably involves money because it's Hollywood.
Well, everything involves money.
But there are certain films that just don't need to be touched, and that's one of them. Psycho, Jaws. There's a handful that just like leave them alone, don't touch them. Instead of, and I get what you're saying, but instead of saying, oh, remake it for a younger audience. No, it's sort of like a history lesson. Let a younger audience go out and find the original and see how well it was made, and how it made in 1961, black and white. But it's such a well made movie. It's so well acted. It's iconic. The shower scene when the woman gets stabbed in the shower is iconic, and it's just it's, and the movie's not gory. It's not bloody, but it's creepy, and it's just that's a movie that. I saw the remake, and I remember going, yeah, it's in color, it's made in the 90s, it's modern, but it's Hitchcock. Don't remake it. Leave it alone. Just like I said, just like Jaws. There's no way you can improve that movie. Not a single thing could be made, because it would lose its charm. It would lose what it has about it, But people, it's all about money, and I'm not a fan of all remakes. Like, one of my all-time favorite movies is Duel, which was Steven Spielberg's very first movie. And you could remake it, but it would be absolutely stupid because it's so well made, and it has its charm, and the actor's amazing, Dennis Weaver. It'd be stupid to remake that movie. There's certain movies you just say, okay, leave it alone, don't touch it, just don't touch it, just leave it alone,
Yeah. Getting back kind of to continuations, another thing that kind of came to mind as we were talking, and this is a series that I love like the John Wick movies.
Right.
Have you seen those?
I've got all three of them. I've only actually watched the first one, but I've got I've got 2 and 3. I just haven't watched them.
Well, those movies, they're coming out with a 4th one.
Right.
And it's all about like action,
Yeah.
Like, I love Keanu Reeves. He's one of my favorite actors.
Right.
I love those movies. But I can sit down and honestly say that there's not a great deal of story development. It's
Right.
mostly action. Like, you go into it like knowing, okay, this is like a full-blown action movie. This
Right.
isn't going to be some long, drawn-out story. And yeah, there is story elements to it, but it's like, it's not the main focus, and
Right.
they know that.
I think that, we watched the first one, and my wife goes, yeah, it was good, because she likes action films. If they're like she likes the Bourne films and some of the Bond films and stuff, and she's like, yeah, it was okay. There wasn't any story to it.
Yeah, because there's really
There is a story.
It's just
but
very simple, and it's not fleshed out.
No.
But that's something that has been wildly successful.
Oh,
is
huge.
The John Wick movies.
They're huge. Yeah.
And even though there's no story, well, there is, but not a lot
It's
of story.
very thin.
They're continuing to remake it, and that's one of the.
They're not continuing to remake it.
That's not what I meant.
They're continuing the
I misspoke.
story.
Yeah, they're just continuing.
Right.
Even, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but it makes you look like, okay, they're solely making this movie because it's successful,
Well, yeah. I mean,
because it's not some.
it's not a deep. They're not deep films.
No, it's not some story writers like, what's the word?
I don't know.
Is it manifesto, or like where it's like their heart and soul put into that work.
Right.
It's not that for a storyteller. It's just a lot of pure action, but it makes money, so they're gonna keep continuing it.
Yeah, I mean, if the series continues past 4, maybe at some time they'll have an episode that's gets a little more deep into character study, and you learn more about the character. Maybe not. Maybe they'll always be, like just from start to finish action. I mean, I don't know. But yeah, those are very successful. So they're going to do a 4th one, and they will either do a 5th one Or if the fourth one doesn't do as well, they'll stop at 4, or they'll say, well, let's take a break for a few years. Or Keanu will say, I'm done. And then it probably, then what do you do? Recast?
No one could match Keanu.
No, but what'll happen is if he has no say so. So like if he says I'm done, I don't want to do anymore, and they go, well, we're going to do a 5th one. We're gonna focus on somebody else, but it's going to be John Wick 5, and it's going to have somebody. I mean, they would do it, and the fans would not be happy because he's so associated with that character at this point.
Yeah.
But if Hollywood thinks they have they got a brilliant idea and we're going to make money, well, they could recast him. I don't know.
Yeah, and that kind of brings back around the Spider-Man thing,
Right.
like with Tobey Maguire was the first Spider-Man.
My favorite.
Then Andrew Garfield. Now Tom Holland.
My least favorite.
It brings people like you.
Crack open this bourbon here.
It brings people like you that just, whenever you see the new Spider-Man movies with Tom Holland, all you think about is Tobey Maguire, and you're like, Tom Holland's not my Spider-Man.
Yeah. Well, I like Tom, but I like Tobey's will always be my favorite because I've said this before. I think he captures all the nerdiness and the goofiness and the awkwardness of what that character is, of what Peter Parker is supposed to be. Plus, I love Sam Raimi as a director because Sam did horror films. He did the Evil Dead films, and I love his directing style. But as far as Spider-Man goes, what happened was, Marvel rebooted and then rebooted and then rebooted again. And so they had 3 Spider-Men that were not connected. So how did they save their ass?
They brought them all together.
We're going to do a multiverse. Now, that has been a thing in comics for years. There's always been, with DC and Marvel, there's been different worlds, different Earth 2, Earth 3, multiverse, all these different, realms. That's something that's been in the comics for years. I don't think that was, I can honestly say I don't think that was ever the plan for Spider-Man. I think they were just rebooting, they were supposed to do a 4th one with Tobey, didn't happen, so we're going to recast, and we're just going to act like those films never happened.
Yeah.
And then they did 2, and then they kind of didn't do as well as they thought. So then it's like, well, we're going to bring it in. We're going to tie it in with the Avengers now.
Something that's we know is already making
It's huge. And so now we're going to act like the second Spider-Man didn't happen. So, those could easily have just been like, oh, they never happened. But then they said, well, hey, wait a minute. We can do the Spider-Verse. We can do the multiverse.
And we could make a crap ton of money.
And they did. But that was never the plan. I can almost guarantee that. It was just a reboot, and then somebody said, hey, wait a minute. Bring them other 2 guys back and act like, yeah, they really do exist in different worlds.
Well, I think in the Tom Holland era of Spider-Man is when Miles Morales into the Spider-Verse came out.
Right.
And that movie was great.
It was really good.
Yeah, it was a wonderful movie. And that, I think, kind of fostered the idea of, okay, there are more than one Spider-Man.
Different
look
worlds.
at all these different ones. And then I think either that was them preparing the fans for, what was going to happen, or they did that based off of, comics or whatever.
Right.
And then they realized, okay, this was a massive success, bringing all these, that movie did great. They loved the idea of all these Spider-Men or whatever.
Right.
You know what we could do? We could bring back Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield and have them in this new movie.
Then they go, see?
And keep it real hush-hush, and it'll be...
Yeah. And they go, well, see, they weren't reboots. This was all part of the master plan. They were different Spider-Men in different worlds.
I agree with you. It was definitely not a master plan.
No, it happened.
But yeah, it happened. It was great. It brought a lot of, I think, fan service to it.
I was just happy to see Tobey again because I really, really, really had hoped that they were able to do their 4th film, and they couldn't. And it never happened. So then Garfield got hired, and they started that series. So I was really happy to see Tobey and Willem Dafoe as the Green Goblin. I was
he did a wonderful job.
Doctor Octopus. I was really happy to see all three because for me those are like, oh man, this is like nostalgic. This is like, of course now DC's going to do that with the Flash movie. We're going to have Keaton as Batman, who was the first Batman in the '89, and then I think Ben is also a Batman in that. I think so. You're going to have they're doing that which it's sort of like, okay, we're copying Marvel's success. But I will say this, it's been done in the comics for decades. There's been this Batman and that Batman. Well, what if this Batman? What if, they had a story arc and it was tied into one of the Flash series where Bruce is the one that Bruce and his mom are the ones that died in the alley. So Bruce got shot, Martha got shot, Thomas, the dad, survived, and Thomas became Batman. So the dad became Batman, and he was a gun-toting Batman. He shot criminals.
Yeah.
That was called Flashpoint. It was like what if, in this world Bruce died and the dad lived and he became Batman. So DC's done that too. But, anyway, so we're about wrapped on time. You either like sequels, you like reboots, or you hate them, or you don't give a shit.
Yeah, that.
Some people don't. Some people just want to be entertained, and they go, "I'll go see it." They don't care.
I think that's almost where the genre I fall into.
You don't care.
Well, I care somewhat, but like, if they made a new one of something that I'd liked, I'm not gonna be like, "Why the heck they make this?"
You're gonna
like, I'm still gonna go watch it.
Right.
I might not like it, but I'm gonna give it a chance.
Right.
So yeah, that's my final take on it. Well, like we always say, thanks for sticking around till the end. New episodes every Friday, and hopefully you guys are liking this new reformatted thing.
And leave us some comments. We've talked about this. Leave us some comments on Facebook, and if you have some subjects you want us to cover.
On Facebook, we don't have Facebook.
Oh, well, on YouTube. We don't have Facebook yet. We will have a Facebook page. But leave us some comments on YouTube. Let us know if there's some subjects that you want us to cover or talk about, and we'll kind of go over it and see if it's something we feel like it's appropriate for us to do. And yeah, you might be able to help influence a future episode. So,
Yep, and we'll see you guys around.
All right, see you guys down the road.